Hey, everybody. Welcome back. I'm squeezing a few more of these On the Schmooze interviews in before rebranding to the Biz Book Publishing Hub podcast this fall. I didn't want to miss the opportunity to meet with today's guest. Speaking of which, let me do the formal introduction. Today's guest is a trailblazer who has redefined what it means to lead with authenticity in the corporate world. A former corporate CEO turned professional pot stirrer, she's the founder of Be Authentic Inc. Her dynamic approach to leadership and commitment to eradicating workplace BS have made her a globally recognized speaker and coach. Her TEDx talk was among the top 20 most viewed globally in 2021, and her best-selling book, You Do You-ish, has further cemented her reputation as a thought leader. With a career spanning over 2 decades, including a transformative tenure as CEO, where she tripled earnings and revitalized employee engagement, she has shown that radical authenticity is not just an approach, but a powerful strategy for success. Her latest book, The 50% Rule, unveils the creative shortcut that has helped her and many others go from underdog status to unmatched success in career and daily life. She's the co-host of the podcast Because Work Doesn't Have to Suck, where she brings her offbeat and impactful insights to a global audience. Her thought leadership has been featured on ABC, CBS, Business Insider, Fast Company, and Well and Good. Please join me in welcoming Erin Hatzikostas. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you. I have to ask, did you throw my bio through like Chat GPT, or are you really that good? Because that was very well curated and 50% ruled, and I'm impressed. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, if you remind me, will happily share towards the end of this how we go about this. It's a little known secret that I don't think I've actually shared, which is hard to find something I haven't talked about in the last 8 years. I'm happy to circle back because if it's a good example of 50%, I want to talk about it. But first, I want to welcome you. Thanks for joining us from your
Yeah,
place in
thanks for having me.
Connecticut. As you know, this is a show about building strong networks, and the context is leadership. So tell me, how do you define leadership, and when did you realize you had the skills to lead?
Yeah, so I'm obsessed with authenticity. And so, I would say it's authentic, which is super lame. But what I will do is I will tell you my definition of authenticity, which is a little different than I think most. So to me, authenticity is about exposing who you are when people least expect it in the service of others. So if I have to define a leader, that's how I would define them. Somebody who, you know, helps people follow them out of curiosity, that does things a little bit different. I always talk about do what's needed, not what's normal, and ultimately be an authentic leader. And,
This is
and
great.
when did I know? It's so
Mhm.
funny. I remember when I realized I wasn't a good leader first. I was much like probably a lot of your listeners. I was that, A student, and then quote unquote A student when I started my first jobs in corporate, meaning, I was raising my hand for stuff. I was surprising people at just how well I was able to catch on to things, bold, going out and figuring out projects, so I was that killer individual contributor. And what does that reward you with? Usually at some point, a leadership position, right? But nobody sits you down, and there's like no like bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah or like coming of age ceremony where somebody's like, oh, congratulations. And by the way, now everything's like 180 degrees from what you've been doing before, right? Like you need to slow down and you need to, be patient and all these things, right? And so I kept going at the same speed as I always go. And I had this huge opportunity. I was working in the international division of our company of Aetna, a large health plan here in the US. And we had an opportunity to work with the UK government on sort of transporting a lot of our practices and what we had learned around care management and data analytics and things in the healthcare world to kind of help them modernize and improve their system, and as well as other global opportunities. So I was sort of handed this role that was way, way, way beyond, the pants I was wearing before. I didn't know what I was doing. I'm from a small town in northern Michigan, and all of a sudden I'm doing this international job, and I don't know any. I don't know any other languages. I know how to say eins Bier bitte, one more beer in German, but so really unqualified. And our first opportunity was the UK government put out this large request for proposal RFP, and it was perfect because it kind of fit into one of the strategic places we wanted to expand globally. And so we get this thing, and I'm talking like 200 pages, year-long process, right? Think of your worst RFP and then multiply it by 10, right? And I remember I even had to hire a consulting firm to translate some of the terms, because even though they speak English, like I couldn't understand how, right? Their terms are so different, especially when you're talking about something specialized like healthcare. And so I got that. And my boss, who was running our international division, said, she had been in the company forever, had lots of great relationships. She's like, I can enable a team to help support you. I'll make a call out to this person and that person. And we sort of can gather this team that is not dedicated to this, but will, designate and help us with this initiative. That's what great leaders do. And it was great. So kind of gathered the team, and I don't even know if I had a meeting with this team, because I was already, sprinting through this thing. And, the thoughts that went through my head, of course, as an immature, not leader, was these people can't possibly get up to speed as fast as I can. I know, so much more. I can do this better, faster myself, right? And so I think I maybe worked with a few people here and there, but looking back, right, I would have had a kickoff, I would have inspired, I would have delegated. And instead I was like too cool for my britches, too fast for my britches, and didn't do that. And I remember it was fine for like a couple weeks. And then like most people do, I was like, oh God, I am like way over my head. And and now it was like, where are those people? Like they're, you've lost the momentum. And so, we went through the process. We had some success, but we would have had a lot more success. So I think that was my first moment, because I had a couple employees work for me before where I was like, oh, wow, this is not as good. And then I don't know the exact moment when I knew I became a good leader, but I think for me, in hindsight, and what I talk about and teach is, there are all these noble principles, whether they're practical or, there's like, think about leadership 101 and 201 and all the things you should do. And it's a lot of work and it's hard to keep track of. And what I've found is nobody can do all of that, right? And the trump card really is authenticity. And that had been what got me where I was. And I was lucky I had my father that I had watched for years, unknowingly watched him. Of course, it took time to reflect on that when I wrote my book. But just this concept of like bucking the norm, especially when I started, then I got it in the next position I had 50 people under me. And then, eventually I became the CEO of this company at 1,000. And
let me just jump in here, because this is a great example of knowing when it's not working. And I want to actually take us back a little bit. You just referenced this slightly when you were talking about your dad. I'm always curious who people were when they were growing up, because sometimes there's in retrospect, in the rearview mirror, it all kind of makes sense, even though the path forward was maybe sometimes very broken. Sometimes the path from who you were to who you are today, it's like been laid out forever since you were 3 years old, right? So I'm always kind of curious, because when we see you today, you are this like finished product leader, right? And it's like, wait, but that's not how we start. And you already shared a little bit about the journey once you were in a company. But when you were on the playground, I'm gonna go back to like, elementary school. You're on the playground. Are you organizing kids? Are you sitting back and watching? Did you raise your hand all the time in class? Sounds like that might be the case. Did teachers rely on you and like leave you in charge when they had to leave the room? Did you run for student office or after school clubs? Like, what was life like for you in those early years? And we'll kick off from there. But I'm just sort of curious, like, how would you sort of describe Erin back then?
Yeah, such a great question. I would say that I was that person that always wanted to buck the norm a little bit. And so when you say, did you organize? The first thing that comes into my head is every year for about 3 years in elementary school, I'd say like second grade through fourth grade or third through fifth, every year we would self-organize a play, Wizard of Oz play, and we would practice it on the playground. Most people had the same parts every year. I was always the Wicked Witch. Amy Beckwith was always the Dorothy. And I think I was always the idea girl, the energy girl, maybe not the project management girl, but I was the one that got people excited and always like knew how to make things a little bit better, a little bit different, a little bit funny. And I think that's largely still who I am.
I've never heard anyone describe the idea of kids self-organizing a play. I mean, it's just a fun thing to fall into and to keep going year after year with the same group of kids as you're getting older. Just like a really fun way for kids to find themselves, their talent, cooperation. I mean, there's so much built in, but the fact that it's self-organized makes it really special. Do you have any remembering like how that got started?
I don't remember how it got started. Like I said, I've always been kind of an idea girl, so it would be pretty plausible that it was maybe my idea. But I don't know for sure. I was always that person that was,
Yeah, that's fun.
let's just do it. Let's do it, right, because that's a little bit normal. To your point, it's not like that's something that most kids always
No,
do.
and like they went along with you because we talk a lot on this show about you're not a leader if there's no followers. Like you can have great
Mhm.
ideas that people don't want to try because they're like, no.
Yeah,
um,
the really interesting thing from my childhood, now that you opened that up, that I did not put together until I was writing my second book, The 50% Rule, was so an example in I think I started in middle school, at least in high school. I'm pretty sure middle school too. So I ran track. And I say I'm pretty sure because my son was in middle school track. They didn't have the hurdles, but I'm pretty sure that's when I started. So I ran the hurdles, 100-meter and the 300-meter hurdles. Now you can't see me, but I'm 5'2.5". So my dad is 5'6". Like I was never destined to be that tall. So the fact that I ran the hurdles is a little bit odd. And people would sometimes ask, right? Because it's kind of a terrifying thing. And I never had a good answer. And actually, when I sat down to write the 50% rule and started to put together some of the principles, one of the principles is, stop outplaying or outworking people and start out uniquing them. And this concept of the reason I ran the hurdles is because less people ran the hurdles. And I'm always kind of this sounds really weird, like a high achiever. I'm always trying to like outworking somebody is not my jam. It's just not fun. Like I am not going to be the person that's like, I had more discipline than them, so I did better, right? So I look for those opportunities where people aren't doing what they're doing. And then the 50% rule helps you start to create those opportunities. So that was another part of me. I was always looking because I was never the fastest runner. I played basketball, but I was never the best shooter, right? I got good grades, but I was second in the class, not first. I was always looking for like, how though can I be the best without the traditional metrics for success? If that makes
well,
sense.
and the pressures of that,
Mm.
like those traditional metrics of success too. You're making me think. I never questioned the fact that my wife ran track. She's 5'3", and the other day she was on a track that had hurdles, and she was walking them with my kids, and like was telling them that she would jump these, and she made a little
Ah,
video explaining it to them, and
that's
I
amazing.
was seeing how high they are compared to her. That's what I was like, huh. I should probably have put that all together. Like that's a pretty big deal. So it is cool, like to go. I'm really drawn for organizing things to go where people aren't paying attention. So once
Mm.
everyone else latches onto an idea and it becomes the idea of the year, I'm like, cool, great.
Love,
What else is there?
love it.
And then I'm like looking around to see what else needs to like be highlighted. So I understand the attraction of being drawn to that. When you were in high school, were there particular teachers that saw potential in you? Were there adults you were looking up to? You didn't know maybe that they were a leader, quote unquote, but like you saw something in them that you appreciated. Like how did those sort of more adult child relationships unfold for you?
Yeah, I mean, so mine was a little interesting because both my parents were teachers. I was from a very, very small town in northern Michigan, and they were born and raised in that town. So a lot of my teachers were also my parents' friends, right? So there was a blurred line. They had known me, beyond just if they had me in school for a year. My dad always tells this story. I don't remember this one because it's from kindergarten, but it's sort of a good. So there was like a test for kindergarten placement. I don't really know why. My birthday was in July, so it wasn't like I was like in October, but for whatever reason, I think they just want to know, right? It's not a yay, nay, but they want to know sort of what the child is coming into the school with. And they set up this series of whatever different things they had you do. And the last one they had us do apparently was they showed us like these blocks and they put them sort of in order. And then they said to us, rebuild the thing. And my dad says he looks over, and I'm their first child. So they're a little like, oh, is she going to get it right? Right. The kindergarten test. And he says, I sort of set out the blocks and I put like 3 of them next to each other, totally not how she did it, and like stacked them wrong. But then at the very last minute, I took like a block from the second to the bottom, took it out, placed it on the top, and I was like, voila. So I got it right, but I did it slightly different. And that's probably like, that is the metaphor for me, and I always, I get to a good place, but I usually take, at least half of my own path.
That's a really fun, like demonstration of who you've always been.
Mm,
There's a story like that out there that even though you don't recall the details, I happen to have a 6.5-year-old and 8.5-year-old. So,
mm,
we just went through the last year of kindergarten.
mm,
So similarly, every child goes to take that test because they kind of want to know kind of where they are and following directions, sitting, all that stuff. And yeah, the first time, my first kid, I had no idea what to expect. And when they took them in a room by themselves, so I don't even know. I was like, "Good luck, follow the nice lady. I hope this works
right.
out okay." So when you were, I don't know, 12 or so, did you have a strong sense of what you wanted to be when you grew up? Was there given that your parents were teachers in a small town, was there like here's the steps to follow, or did you have a real passion for something that you were drawn to?
Yeah, I would say maybe not by 12, but by high school, I knew I didn't want to be a teacher. So I knew what I didn't, I would go, my father taught at another school, but my mother was an elementary school teacher in our district. And, I would go to help her out once in a while, and my patience would run thin about 30 minutes in. I'm like, yeah, I don't think this is for me. I was pretty good at math. And not a lot of people are good at math, especially girls. And so when I went into college, I actually I thought I want to be an engineer because we're like, math. What do you do with it? Like we think there's like 2 professions. One was an engineer, and I thought it was cool to do something on the environment. So I found this program at Western Michigan University, which was ended up being my alma mater for my undergrad, which was paper engineering. Because to me that was like, okay, paper, trees, um, and math. And I not only overslept one of my exams and got my first C ever in my entire life, we took a trip to the paper plant, and it just stunk to high heaven. And it was like in Iowa or something. And I'm like, no, I can't do that. So I always tell the story. I didn't know what I was going to do. I dropped out of engineering after my freshman year. And my sophomore year, I was living with a couple friends, and one was a junior. So she was already in the business college, and they must have had like here's I don't know, bunch of career kind of thing going on in the business school. And she came home that day and she was so excited because she knew I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just kind of taking some classes. And she said, "Oh my God, I found it, Erin. I found the career for you." And I was sort of like, okay, what is it? And she's like, no, it's high pay, low stress. And I was like, of course, I'm like, I'm listening. And she said, "You got to be good at math. And you're the only person I know who's good at math. It's called an actuary." And, it was like, whoo, so you imagine how sexy that sounded in 1995 when you couldn't Google how unsexy it was. So that's, so and then, I was such a impressionable person where I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And that's actually where I started my career. And and failed miserably at it. But yeah, that was kind of my journey of like the first experiments and
I
getting it.
will say, Erin, that I read a little bit about that on your website, and it cracks me up because, again, not knowing what to do with this, like you have a feeling of math, you're like, oh, I kind of like this, but it's like, well, how do you apply the skills? Like that's always our question, is like we have certain skills or aptitudes or inclinations towards certain subjects over others, but it's not always clear how that spells into like a career path. And so,
Right.
you tried something which is good. Like you can't like think about it. You have to try something. But when you graduated from this school, did you have a sense of where you wanted to go next? Like, did you actually get into that world, or did you immediately think, oh, I'm going somewhere else?
Oh, Robbie, I mean, the day after she told me about this super, sexy, high pay, low stress job, I was in the library researching it and probably weeks later making phone calls to get an internship. Oh yeah, I went at it. I was like this, I'm not afraid to go at things. So I went at it. I actually had a friend. I don't even remember her last name because she was a waiting tables friend. It was one of those summer friends. We waited tables together. And when didn't find any books, by the way, on being an actuary, but I found like this pamphlet that was beige and it listed every sort of company name, address, and phone number of companies that hired actuaries. So, it was insurance companies, consulting firms. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of them in Connecticut because there's a lot of insurance. And I have a friend who I waited tables with, Heather, who moved out to Connecticut last year to work for a company. So I just started making phone calls, and I'll never forget the phone call I made to Aetna. It's so weird, right? Like, I don't even know. They pick up the phone, you talk to them. It's such a foreign concept. And I said, I'm coming out for spring break from Michigan to Connecticut in whatever it was, March. So, it would make a lot of sense. Like, I'd love to interviews while I'm out there. And who knows if they would have given me the interview if I didn't say that or not. But they gave me the interview. And then I, of course, I scrambled to find out if I could come out to Connecticut because that was a little bit of a white lie. But yeah, no, I went at it. The problem is nobody told me you not only have to be good at math, but the tests are all graded on a curve. And there's a bunch of really smart people that smart at math that take it too. And I went on to not pass one single exam.
Yeah, there's a whole lesson in that, but what I'll take from this is your willingness to put your all in it and cold call and figure out how to show up and get the interview and talk your way in, back when, really it was all by phone,
Mhm.
or mailing something to somebody. And today, when we have access to contact information and 17 ways to connect with people, I still know people who hesitate to take that first step. So you have
Yeah.
to take the first step to find out whether you'll even like something. I happen to really like internships and externships and whatever those things are called, because it gives students a chance to experience what it's really like to work in a company, and experience that there are many different types of jobs in a company that they wouldn't have otherwise known about. So
Yep.
it's a good way in when you're not sure where to go. I know you now as this person who's got 2 books and like a successful podcast and a TEDx, but it's been seen like a gazillion times. It's hard to see the person who failed the actuary exams and then align to the person you are today. But in retrospect, do you see a line between the two? Is there like something that makes this all make sense?
I see well, I see some luck. I see some messiness. I see me transferring money from a savings account the other day because I had cash flow challenges with my business, right? Like, so I see imperfection. I don't see, I see the highs and lows because I'm still, we've never arrived. We always have highs and lows of days. Even when I was in my corporate job as CEO, like I wrote all the accolades, right? The triple earnings and 12 percentage points. I don't write the too many to count system issues we had, mea culpas. I had to go out to Fortune 500 companies, near heart attacks when, senior executives were pissed or mad at me, like, so, but back to your question. So all that to say, I'm, I'm far from perfect, and all this stuff has lots of messiness behind it and currently. The thing I think I see the most is finding a way to propel and get myself excited and energized for that next thing, and only making a strategic decision step by step. What I mean by that is, in my career, in my traditional career in the corporate world, it took me a few times to realize I would go through this pattern of doing really well, get into a job, have to figure it out, struggling, then becoming, sort of this machine and person people came to and having success. And then all of a sudden feeling really lazy. And it took me a few times to realize the pattern wasn't that I was lazy. It was that I was uninspired. And why was I uninspired? I was uninspired because the thing that gets me excited is the challenge, is the mostly internal, proving and learning something new and proving to myself I can figure it out. A little bit of external too, being able to prove, hey, I can do something different. But I'd say 95% internally. And so in my corporate career, I didn't cerebrally make moves per se. They were somewhat strategic, but even, for example, when I joined the division, which I ended up becoming the CEO for, I didn't first of all have any inclination that I would ever become the CEO of that company. But it was I think I took sort of strategic inspired action. I did go there because I knew there was a good culture. It was a recently acquired company. I did know that it was a growing industry, so there'd be opportunity. I knew that people would probably leave, right? Because the acquired people don't always like to stay in the big bad, matrix world of their acquirer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I just find a way, and I don't fight. I know less and less as I go along, do I fight having to do things through discipline, but instead finding what is that thing, and that's really the heart of this second book. What is that thing that will get me excited, that's a little bit creative, that's half sort of new for me or new for the people I'm marketing to or serving. And so I'm doing the work, I'm doing it because I'm energized. And when I'm energized, I put out some great stuff. When I'm doing out of discipline, I'm no better than the average Joe. So I think that's probably the thread.
I can relate so much to what you're just describing as someone who's been reinventing my business a lot the last few years, bringing old expertise with me, but always thinking of new endeavors. And um, I've just accepted that I'm a multi-passionate entrepreneur, and I don't have to stick in a box or stay in one lane. I have to have a defined offer for a defined audience, but I don't need to have just one audience or one offer.
Yep.
And keeps things fresh because in 1 week can have 4 different revenue streams that are buzzing. And that's what's keeping this really fun for me, is that none of it feels stale. I would love to hear what inspired you to write the second book, because the first book I kind of get, regardless of the topic, there's a way in which it's like, I want to make my mark in the world. I want to have a book. I want to be a speaker who's recognized. Right. Okay. So you now know how hard the book writing and publishing and marketing process is. What led to writing a second book? Because now you know what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah, and it wasn't discipline again. Both of my books came, like I always say, they came when the gremlin was trying to crawl out of my stomach. Even the first one I did probably earlier than I needed to, but it was like, I've got this message and I talk about authenticity so differently than everybody else. And it was such a linchpin for not just my happiness in my career, but my success. That it was like, okay, I got to do it. But also, to your point, it did help the repertoire as a speaker and all that kind of stuff. The second one, ironically, so while I was out there, at least under perception kicking butt, of course, again, I mean, my first couple of years as an entrepreneur, I think I brought home like $35,000, $40,000, right? And I used to be making, let's just call it, way more than 10 times that. But the ironic thing is, I was out talking about authenticity. How is your strategy? Talking about my framework. Meanwhile, I was doing my own learnings, right? I'd never been an entrepreneur. So I was in the bazillion workshops, playbooks, podcasts. And then I was part of this group called Brand Builders Group for 3 years, where I was learning how to do everything from launch a course to write a good email to, do a speaking video, right? And so I was really immersed in exponential learning. And I was at a 2-day event. And I think the topic might have been how to grow your speaking business or something. We always had 2-day intensives. And they gave us like an 85-page, beautiful PowerPoint with like the whole playbook, like the fast forward button. And I should have been thrilled. And instead I was totally paralyzed. And about halfway through that 2-day session, I just remember thinking like, oh, back to this, like, I know I do my best work when I'm energized and I don't got it. And then I sort of whispered to myself, I had always used this 50% rule a little bit differently. When people are asking for career advice, I'd always say you have to be 50% uncomfortable in a job you take. And so I had kind of called it the 50% rule. I've written about it in You Do You. It's just, a couple paragraphs. And I sort of took that out of the attic and polished it off and used it for a different reason. I said, well, I said to myself, what if you 50% rule this? And what I meant by that was, what if you could give yourself permission to only do about half of what they're teaching you? Throw out the stuff that feels icky, not quite you. Maybe you don't think it's going to work, or it's just simply too hard. It's not something you want to invest in, whatever it is, and make room for your own ideas. What can you plug into that, et cetera? And so I remember just that feeling like of immediately being back to Erin, like back to energized Erin. And so for the next year or so, I would do that same thing. And it always take me a long time to get back to it. So I took Amy Porterfield's online course thing. And I write about this in the book. I got to shooting the first like 5 or 6 videos for my online course, got in bed that night. And I remember thinking, okay, that was good. And then I was like, oh, I hate good. Like, I don't do good. I like to do great. I like to do standout stuff, right? I like to do different. And sort of went through a process like, oh, why was I following her when we are slightly different people? She's more disciplined than me, but I have more charisma. I have this, that. And so I was using it, for myself. And then it felt like every time somebody would come to me with an issue, whether it was a client or friend, they would talk about it. And I'd be like, well, why don't you 50% rule it? And they'd be like, huh? And so I'd explain it to them, and then I would watch them sort of like get unlocked and come up with these new ideas. And but still not enough to write a book about it. I mean, that would have been maybe 6 chapters. And then what happened, Robbie, I started to see it everywhere. I started to see this pattern. So for example, I went to see Hamilton a couple summers ago, and I was like, not only blown away because it's just the best Broadway play ever. It was like he 50% ruled Broadway. And I saw it with John Madden and how he did broadcasting. I saw it with the Savannah Bananas and how they reinvented half of baseball. I saw it with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I just started to see this pattern, Weird Al, Whitney Houston. I realized this 50% rule isn't just this mantra to kind of get over your poop, but really a thing that a shortcut that can help you back to the like wanting to compete in a league of my own, which is sort of like the pithy way to say it, right? Back to the hurdles and wanting to compete in that league that's not quite so stuffed with people. It is to sort of take half normal, half new purposely, not just because you're lazy or uninspired, but because it'll help you immediately gain the attention and things of others. And that's when I was like, oh my God, I have to write this book. And this is going to be super annoying to hear. I loved writing this book. I loved editing this book. I'm telling you, Robbie, I want to almost throw up in my mouth, saying it, because the first book, I liked writing here and there, but like the editing process was horrible. I literally down to the end when my editor would send, we many, many passes at the end, right? And doing your final edits, I would actually get excited. I would sometimes sit up at night and read like half, or if not the whole manuscript when I should have been in bed. I just am so obsessed with this rule. I'm obsessed with how it came out. Super freaking annoying. I mean, there were some hard times, but for the most part, when I think back at writing this thing, it was a blast.
That's amazing. I mean, the whole thing that you're describing is great, but that last little bit I have to address because I have published 3 books. I write a weekly email. I write a LinkedIn newsletter, and I don't identify as a writer.
Right.
Because it's gotten easier over the last decade. It's gotten easier. I know I have less head stuff around it, but I usually tell people, your book is ready when you're sick of it. when you're like so done, you don't want to even look at it anymore. One of the things I focus on these days is helping authors launch their books, because most of them, they kind of hit publish, but they don't build up that launch team of likely prospects and referral partners that will focus on getting them 50 plus reviews and like really having a strong out the gate experience and lining up the pipeline from the book to the offers that come after the book. And so I'm kind of curious, how have you tapped into your network to get this book underway? Like I heard you mention before we got on air, like you're doing pre-sales. You've got the book, with a publication date, which is the day this is actually releasing today. So how have you like galvanized a team of people to help you make this book have the kind of reach that it deserves?
Yeah. So last time I did what you're supposed to do on paper. So probably after the book was written, a couple months before launch, I sort of gathered a team. I think there was maybe 15, and did sort of the like, and I did, I got that team. Plus I remember I'll tell you this quick anecdote and sort of hack, maybe not hack, but what worked for me. I remember a sort of a coach. I had like an Amazon coach of like, how do you do keywords and all that junk? And she was telling me you need these 30 plus reviews. And she said, so you need to send it. I remember her saying you have to send it out, or you need at least 10 reviews, I think was like to start. Cause if you want to do any ads or whatever, so you have to send it to like 40 people because only like 25% will actually do it. And I remember thinking, well, that stinks. Why do only 25% do it? And so I sort of backtracked and got into like, why would I not do it? And I said, probably because there's like, it's scattershot. You're on a BCC, an email or whatever. And so for the first book, I spent like a whole day sending out bomb videos individually to people, just saying, hey, and totally authentic. I'm like, here's why I need the reviews, because it helps with it. Like, it wasn't like, oh, it would help me out so much. It was like, no, we need it. Cause if we want to promote, right, I left them under. And I just said, just let me, it's no obligation, but let me know if you're willing to do it. And that's all they had to say. And then once they committed, right, so they would write back, would be happy to. Then I sort of engaged them. So I thought that was really good. I exponentially stepped it up this time. So I started really writing this book, we'll call it first quarter of 2023. And I remember thinking, not just for the marketing, that I wanted the energy, because with my first book, I had so many people have come back and they love it and they tell me, and it always created energy. And I'm like, well, why wouldn't I create that while I'm writing the book? So I sent out an email. I'll never forget it. One evening, I said, I'm looking for, I think I said something like 12 to 15 volunteers to be part of the book process. And it's going to be simple. We're going to meet monthly on Zoom. You'll give input. I'll have topics, whatever. And within a couple hours, I had like 75 people. I actually turned people away because I'm like, that's not fair if the group's too big. And so we have a team of over 60 people. We've now segregated into like the book board who meets every month, versus others that I give them updates. We'll ask them to do reviews once the time comes. And it's been so fun because the people on this team are so genuinely, first of all, bought into the 50% rule, and just hearing their stories, and like, they're not doing this because they're like, oh, I like Erin, I want to promote their book. They like the freaking rule. It's the rule, right? Like, the book is just the conduit for people to really soak in the rule and be as ridiculously addicted to it as I am and they are. And it's just given me so much energy. We've ideated everything from, I didn't want to do a book tour with my first one. I blamed it on COVID, but it wasn't totally true that I couldn't do a book tour because it was February of 2021. Reality is I just didn't want to do what everybody else. Like, I didn't want to sit down and do a spreadsheet and come up with coffee shops and bookstores and bleh, right. I'm just not, I don't know, it's not my thing. So with this one, I came up with the initial idea after I read one of my chapters. And then I was like, well, why don't you apply this to the book tour? And came up with the idea of doing a tailgate themed book tour. So then we ideated, it's actually called the half ridiculously authentic, half rampantly extravagant tailgate book tour. And just this, like, basically, when we have people hosting them, UConn's hosting the first one here in Connecticut, and they asked to do a book club. And I said, you can, yeah, but it has to be tailgate themed. And it's amazing how excited people get. And that's what the rule does, right? It doesn't take much. Like, we haven't reinvented the book tour, but we've changed the theme. We're doing some of them at breweries, some at jewelry stores, but it's all, the food's going to be tailgate. It's going to be solo cups versus wine glasses. And so the team's they've been amazing. The energy they've brought to me, the ideas, and then ultimately the support, of course, as we launch it.
This is awesome. It's a lot of fun hearing how different authors activate their network to help them come up with like really creative marketing plans. And I also really want to highlight the fact that you weren't writing in secret, which so many authors
Mhm.
do. You have been incorporating this community ongoing, either with like actual, continuous loop around feedback, or just keeping people up to date even.
And some of them have stories in the book. So I have
Yes, of
I
course.
have real peeps stories that I sprinkle throughout. And,
It's a
of course,
great way to,
yeah.
see your concept come to life by gathering those stories.
Mhm.
Um, my claim to fame is that I've independently published 3 books, and all of them have over 200 Amazon reviews. So I
I saw
build these
that.
really big launch teams, and like you, I feel like we have to hyper personalize, and so I use technology to help me do that, but I make sure that the message is going from me to that one person, and it's the message they need. Like, if they
Mhm.
already took an action, they're not gonna be reminded to take that action again because they've already done that. And I really nurture people through the process, and I collect the reviews in advance. And
Mm.
then when the book is published, I give it back to them to put it on the Amazon page, and I give them
Love it.
prompts and support. But I also, like, last October, my friend and mentor Dory Clark said, "Why are you not a book launch coach for like the third or fourth time in 7 years?" So that's now one of my many
Oh, I love it.
multi-passion hats, is I'm a book launch strategist, and I help other people design those kinds of launches with big launch teams that get the reviews, but also lead to conversations with the people like you, who are so excited about the concepts in the book that they're going to help come up with creative other opportunities, like give people the opportunity to give back to you, and bring this idea out. And we're about to get to my favorite wrap up question, but first I'm going to
Mm.
just pause for a second for a quick word from our sponsor. All right, my favorite wrap up question. I want to stay in touch with you, Erin. I love your energy. I love your ideas. Can't wait to read the book. If we're meeting a year from now and I'm like, oh, hey, it's been a year. It's been a year since we did that interview. I'm going to ask you, like, what have you been up to? What are you celebrating?
Mm.
And so I want to know, when I ask you that a year from now, what are you going to say? What are you most looking forward to in the year ahead?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you, oh my gosh, Robbie, remember that thing where Mall of America reached out to me, which is true, they did, and asked me to come ride a roller coaster on National Roller Coaster Day, which is also National Authenticity Day, in August. And we talked about my book. That spurred a number of excitement along with the tailgate tour. And now I'm working with companies and leaders to 50% rule their business and come up with crazy ideas on a regular basis, and talking about that as well as authenticity on more stages than I ever have before.
That's amazing. I can't wait to celebrate all of that and help you do it. Congratulations on your latest book. How can people find you and follow your work?
Yeah, I mean, first, once you're done binging on this podcast, I do have a podcast, as you mentioned, because work doesn't have to suck, and it's just the letter B, cause. So that's a fun one if you're a podcast listener, which you probably are. I mostly hang out on LinkedIn like a loser. There all the time. So if you want to interact more real time, I would say go to LinkedIn, and you can find like my website and all that stuff there too. So Erin Hatzikostas, which I'm sure will be in the show notes. I always say, if you can spell me, you can find me. I'm the only one out there.
I will put all the links in the show notes, including to your website, your amazing TEDx talk, Why You Don't Have to Compromise for Your Career, your podcast, your 2 books, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube. We've got all the links in the show notes at ontheschmooze.com. Erin, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been great.
Thanks for having me. You say you ask the questions that other people don't, and you do, and it's really fun. So thanks for all you do.